Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest of our one-to-one series. My name is Martin Redmayne. I'm joined today by the amazing Matt Griffin from the 311 Institute. Matt, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing very well, Martin. Thank you. Except for my ankles, which is still recovering from a fall down the stairs. But yeah, otherwise all good.
So you are a futurist, but tell me a bit more about exactly what your, let's say, raison d'etre is and what you're focused on.
Yeah. So I sort of focus on a whole variety of different things. But for example, I always firmly believe basically that the legacy that you leave is the future that you leave behind. So a lot of my focus is on sustainability. So at the moment, we're working with the United Nations, basically on all of their United Nations SDGs. But from a futurist perspective, I focus on two types of futures. So the near and midterm futures, which are the next kind of 20 years. And the impact that technology, for example, will have on global business, culture, and society. But I also look 50 years out, which is where a lot of the sovereign governments are particularly interested in when we start talking about, the future of energy, infrastructure, jobs, skills, education, all these kinds of things. But fundamentally, what I try and do is I try and sort of bring all of these different future narratives back down to reality, try to show people what they actually mean for them on the ground today, and how they can actually use these to benefit their own lives, their own businesses, and the planet as a whole. And as the future increasingly accelerates, new things come through faster and faster and faster. The level of societal change that we're now starting to witness is just truly staggering.
Yeah. I think one of the fascinating things, Matt, whenever we've spoken in the past, is that there's so many things happening in the background of let's say the future world that we're not even aware of in many cases. And I think that's the fascinating stuff that you're working on. One of the things I've got to try and bring into our conversation today is that we're looking short term in your world to 2030. Our theme for the Amsterdam Forum this year is what should super yacht industry look like in 2030?
Yeah.
And if you put that blue sky sort of perspective on, and you said, okay, we've got an increase in wealth. We've got huge numbers of increase in ultra high net worths across the world. Yeah. So the potential marketplace is always growing. What do you think is on their mind as these ultra high net worths and where yachting or super yachting fits into their psyche at the moment?
Yeah, so great question. So I mean, just to put it into perspective, throughout the global pandemic, particularly in 2020, high net worth individuals added about $4 trillion more to their assets. So they now have a cumulative asset base of about $11.9 trillion. And we're seeing a rapid acceleration. Now, when we start having a look at what the majority of HNW and UHNWs are actually now starting to think about, on the one hand, there's sustainability. And to some respects, it's because they have to focus on sustainability, because increasingly sustainability is good business, it's ethical business, and increasingly governments and individuals and organizations care much more about it. So, some HNWs basically kind of just go along with it. Some are very proactive in trying to actually lead this new revolution, bearing in mind that the world's greatest challenges are also the world's greatest business opportunities.
Yes.
But increasingly, as HNWs start looking at themselves, they want to live longer. There's that kind of saying, the only thing that's really guaranteed is death and taxes. But we are now starting to enter an era in the healthcare and biopharma space where we can see the technologies starting to come through that extend the average human lifespan from about 84 as it stands today to 150. And these are everything from things like 3D printed organs, in vivo gene editing, all these kinds of different things. So the life of an HNW is getting increasingly interesting.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, we have the land that we can go and explore. We have the oceans and the ocean depths that we can explore. But we also have space, bearing in mind that the cost of accessing space has fallen in by 99% in the past number of years. And increasingly, organizations, even including NASA, are talking about space hotels. These are the ultimate experiences that, the average Joe doesn't really or can't really get access to yet. So, there's a lot going on. But generally what I find with a lot of the HNWs is there is so much going on. They have, on the one hand, difficulty sort of doing all the due diligence on it all to see what is actually here. You know, what's here, what could I care about that maybe I'm not actually seeing? And then it's sort of moving to that next phase. Okay, you know, I've seen a number of things that I'm interested in. For example, you know, life extension technologies and actually being able to, you know, see my great-great-grandchildren actually grow up, for example, which changes the concept of wealth management and estate management and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then it's a case of, well, how do I actually access some of these new capabilities and things? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? What ecosystems do I go and explore? And, you know, how do I start moving the dial for my own benefit, my family's benefit, my business benefits, and for planetary benefits as well?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting subject, the ESG and also the sustainability topic. And there's a lot of what they call rhetoric in various reports I've read where they're doing it as token gestures almost, or they're trying to look good. Yeah. Is that a fair assessment of the way in which it's being used as a PR machine, or is there a genuine interest in changing the world for good, if you like?
So I think this is very much where the character of the individual plays an important role. So giving you a sort of just a couple of data points. So for example, about 50% of the HNWs that I work with, they're very much about, okay, sustainability is a great business opportunity that allows me to make money. You know, where shall I put my money? Where do I invest? You know, that kind of thing. You know, where should I look? About another 50% are much more philanthropic. You know, they are interested in how some of these new things can actually benefit themselves, but actually, you know, they are genuine about trying to move the dial on some of the larger societal issues. You know, when we start having a look at things like Davos, for example, in the World Economic Forum, there's been quite a lot of talk about the talk that goes on at Davos, where HNWs, UHNWs, basically, and some of the world's business leaders come together and they say, yes, you know, we really do need to solve the wealth gap. We do need to solve education, poverty, hunger, you know, health and wellness, and all these sort of other things that we see in the United Nations SDGs. And they all talk an incredibly good game. But then when you start having a look at how that translates into action on the ground, a lot of it is really, really thin. And actually, a lot of the problems that they talk about, particularly things like, you know, wealth inequality, is actually getting worse, not better. Yes. Now, part of that is due to the function of business that we see today, because as an individual, I can create a business and all of a sudden I have access to anyone who's connected on the planet, and I can scale my business to 3.5, and in about another 5 years, 8 billion people on the planet. So if I sell $1 worth of stuff to everyone on the planet, I'm an instant billionaire. Yeah. You know, so we have very new and we have very new and real business opportunities that mean that the rich are going to get richer. For example, when you have a look at Jeff Bezos, I continually posit that with life extension technologies, he could very well be the world's first trillionaire. You know, he's already worth what, 200 billion? And he's still got what, another 20, 30, 40 years of just regular life left in front of him, let alone when we start talking about his Altos Institute.
Yes, yeah, fascinating. In terms of what I call the way in which people will live in the next 8 years to 2030, we're talking about wellness, talking about sort of this age, life expectancy and extension. Yeah. Does that mean the wealthier clients in the future will be fitter and able to enjoy life more on board?
Yeah, so arguably, yes. So this is sort of where I'm going to bring two things in. So today we can replace 70% of the human body. You know, for example, you break your hip, you can have an artificial hip, an artificial heart. You know, we can do lung and kidney transplants, all these kinds of things. When we look at the advent of 3D printed organs, we've actually recently 3D printed a human heart that is this big and it's functional. By 2030, it'll be human-sized, and by 2035, we hope it would actually be regulated and the technology mature enough where you can actually have it implanted into you without someone else having to die. So today we already have the technology in a variety of different shapes and guises to replace 70% of the human body. We are increasingly getting to the point where we can replace the other 30% of the human body, except for the fact that the brain is mission critical.
Yes.
If something happens to your brain, you're stuffed. Yes. Now, in terms of living fitter, healthier lives, you know, this is really where we have to balance physical fitness and wellness with mental wellness. Now, mental wellness, basically, we typically see that as a crisis, particularly post-COVID.
Yes.
There are a lot of new technologies coming through that actually help us identify mental health issues, everything from PTSD to dementia and so on and so forth. We can do it just with an app on your smartphone now, for example.
Yes.
But when it comes to living happier, sort of healthier lives, yeah, you still have to be eating right, exercising, and everything else. However, if you do go off the reservation, we do have an increasing variety of healthcare-related technologies that can fix you, like we fix your car. And even when we have a look at food, we have 3D printed, 4D printed, and lab-grown food that I can tailor to your particular genome or your particular nutritional requirements. If you want me to 3D print you or grow you a fillet steak, a piece of Wagyu beef, but you want it to taste of orange, you want it to have added vaccines in, we can already do that, let alone some of the other crazy things. So as we start sort of stretching out to that sort of 10, 20, 30-year timeline, we already see, for example, Nestle 3D printing personalized food for individuals in Japan, and that's a multi-billion-dollar business now itself. So there's lots and lots of things that we can actually do to improve the health of individuals without them actually having to compromise their lifestyle. If you want to eat chocolate, you can eat chocolate till the cows come home. We can see technologies that can help us reduce HDL and LDL cholesterol and all these kinds of other things. But you do still have to be very conscious that you need a balanced life, and that is, family, friends, health, fitness, all that, purpose, for example, as well. And that's sort of one thing I suppose, basically, maybe we should sort of mention quickly. As people live longer, what's your purpose? You've been successful in business, you've got 10 exits under your belt, fantastic. You've got, a 9-figure bank balance, for example. What's your legacy? What's your purpose? What do you want to leave behind when you do eventually shuffle off this mortal coil and end up becoming a digital human in a can?
Yeah. It's a fantastic topic, because obviously yachting is a very interesting cultural playground which has no real purpose. It's just a fun platform for relaxation and entertainment and enjoyment.
Yeah.
There are certain clients that are in our marketplace that add purpose to the yacht's operation, be it ocean exploration or environmental research, etc. So that may accelerate as well. They may almost see that becoming part of the purpose behind the future yachting environment.
Well, I mean, and that's a very good point. So, for example, if you have a look at, say, the Earth 300 project. So, for people that aren't sort of aware of that particular project, it's a 500 to 700 million pound super yacht project, where the people who are actually building the yacht want to host over 160 scientists. It's state of the art, obviously. So quantum so uses quantum technologies, artificial intelligence. It's nuclear powered, albeit the fact that you actually don't need nuclear power basically in a yacht, let alone really even at a national level now, because of advances that we're seeing in the energy sector, which is kind of a different topic. But when we actually have a look at the purpose of super yachts, there is absolutely no reason basically why they can't actually have a more sustainable purpose or an environmentally friendly purpose. So whether it is ocean exploration, Triton have a submarine that will take you to the bottom of the Mariana Trench and back basically within 16 hours. Surely there's something interesting you could actually do with that platform, outside of a nice day trip, obviously. But when we start having a look at business models, what happens basically if all of a sudden you are building your super yacht in a traditional way, but now you give over 20 to 30% of the space for, should we say, philanthropic activities. And bearing in mind, when we have a look at the Earth 300 project, one of the things I sort of find interesting about it is one of the things that they're looking to do is they are looking to try to market themselves to billionaires. They're selling tickets at about $3 million a pop. And what they are trying to do is they're trying to use this staggeringly interesting, highly technological super yacht platform as a way to get billionaires more interested in particularly ocean conservation. So it's kind of a a different type of experience again. It's a different type of holiday vacation, a different set of skills and viewpoints. And that is an interesting project, but there's absolutely no reason basically why HNWs and UHNWs basically couldn't actually do something similar. And even when we actually have a look at the future of life, we're now, since we last spoke, there are now 4 ocean cities planned, partly because of sea level rise. So you've got a lot more ocean that you can cover. Unfortunately, we're seeing sea levels rise at about 8 millimeters a year, and that's the fastest rate we've seen in over 55 million years. Yeah. But when you actually have a look at some of these ocean cities, Male, with the Maldives, they're now sinking. Well, I say sinking, they're flooding. Yeah. So Male is now starting to build an ocean city. We've got an ocean city being built off the Bahamas. We have Oceanics, which has just been approved by the United Nations as a ocean city for about 3,000 to 5,000 people. So as I say, there's lots of interesting things in our future. Some of these interesting things are generally for the wrong reasons. But this is sort of where increasingly, when we can sort of draw it back to that purpose, there's a huge amount of good that people who have access to wealth and resources and different levels of expertise and all that kind of stuff can really help move the dial on some of these topics to the benefit of both themselves, their future families and future generations, but also the world as a whole.
Yeah, do you think that's probably what the future does hold in terms of that blue sky thought of the responsibility of the world's ultra high net worth and very high net worth clients are to almost reinvest in our future?
Yeah.
But with a purpose of actually, yes, you're saying there's a business strategy there, but in a way they're more powerful than governments are in terms of being able to accelerate change.
Well, absolutely. So on the one hand, it would be very easy for me to sit here as a non-billionaire to say, I think billionaires basically have a duty of care to the people of the world and to the planet. And I think that they should spend all of their money helping people and planet, including me. Every single one of us has a role to play when we have a look at building a better future. Whether it's not spreading misinformation or disinformation or conspiracy theories, whether it's, recycling more, whether it is actually walking more rather than taking the electric car, for example, all these kinds of things, living a sort of more sustainable life. We all have a very vital role to play. However, bearing in mind that HNWs basically do have access to wealth and resources, they have much more power and ability to do a lot more good faster.
Yes.
Which is, on the one hand, what we need. When we have a look at trying to get to net zero by 2050, for example, as a planet, it's generally estimated that we need to be spending between $3 to $6 trillion on ESG related activities. We're spending $1.7 trillion today. We have ESG funds, and we've got the Green Deal via the European Union, which are trying to sort of close that gap. So again, when we talk about some of the world's greatest challenges, they are fantastic business opportunities. But really, when it comes down to individuals, it really comes down to the character of the individual in question. Yes. And their what purpose they want. So, for example, one of the main reasons, in fact, if not the main reason why I actually started the 311 Institute and the World Futures Forum is because I want to make the world a better place, and I want to leave the world a better place when I actually exit this coil base and I'm uploaded to the matrix and eventually put into a robot. All of us have the power today to change something, to spread a better idea, to be part of the solution. And that does include HNWs, but it really does come down to they have to want to be a part of the solution, and they want to have to be able to sort of spearhead it. Because if they fundamentally don't care about the future of the planet, the future of the people that they are living alongside, then frankly, being blunt, what use to society are they? They're a bunch of zeros that ultimately you can't take with you.
Yes.
And this is sort of where we get into those kind of polarizing debates where it's a lot of people maybe watching this will think, well, that's a bit unfair. But, we do have different types of people on the planet. Some look after themselves. Some look after everybody else. Yeah. and we do live on this single pale blue dot together. NASA has got a very, very interesting perspective. It's called the orbital perspective. The Japanese say, we all live under one sky. And it does come down to, how did you help the world, make the world a better place today? And if you can't answer that, whether it's I recycled an extra crisp packet, or I, started an institute, for example, or whatever it happens to be, then you're actually missing an opportunity. And a lot of the things that we're doing, basically, there's a huge amount of fun to be had. But actually, there's a huge amount of mental stimulation, basically, in trying to solve some of these challenges. These are challenges that some of the world's brightest minds are trying to solve. And there's got to be a challenge for HNWs there. When we pit you against the best, are you going to smell of roses, basically, or are we going to be sending you back to school?
Yeah. It's interesting when you say that. There's a very interesting subject there in terms of that inspiring people to get excited about the future in terms of how they can make a difference. And I think that's one of the opportunities the yacht market has, is to make it sound really cool and exciting, where they invest in R&D and materials and new technologies, and more importantly, going back to your nuclear Earth 300 thing, energy. Energy is our biggest problem going forward. What fuels do we use? What systems do we use? Is it electric? What's your view on that, Matt, in terms of these? So where is energy going?
So just to put this into context, we all know that climate change is an issue. Putting some numbers against that, the number of multi-billion-dollar extreme weather events has increased by over 600% in the past 20 years. Extreme weather events have killed over 1.23 million people. They've affected 4.6 billion people, and they've done just under $3 trillion worth of damage in that time. So when we have a look at climate change, a lot of the things that we see that are driving climate change are greenhouse gases. Hence a lot of these net zero pledges that we actually see today. Right here, right now, today, we have the technologies to decarbonize over 70% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Whether it is because we have different energy technologies, whether it's because we even have things like green concrete. So bearing in mind that concrete adds between 8 to 10% to the global greenhouse gas emissions high. So when we have a look at the future of energy, today we have 1 trillion watts of renewable energy installed, and we need that to be 6 trillion watts in order for us to completely come off fossil fuels. Putting that in gigafactory terms, it's about 100 gigafactories, sort of the Elon Musk gigafactories. Today, one of the biggest conversations that we have about renewable energy is when the sun goes in or when the sun goes down, they stop generating electricity. When the wind stops, they stop generating electricity. We already have solar panels that are 20% efficient. You can buy those today from anyone. We have 30%, we have 48% energy efficient solar panels already coming out of the labs. We have 80% on the cards. We have 132% energy efficient solar panels that have already been prototyped using a type of material called, it's a nanophotonic material called black silicon. If we put bacteria into solar panels, we can generate electricity when it's cloudy. If I use nanophotonic materials, I can actually generate electricity from moonlight and from ambient light. So when we have a look at the future of energy, fusion, we're making some strides there. We can 3D print mini nuclear reactors that will still play a part in boosting the grid. We are increasingly using 3D printing to create much, much larger wind turbines. So we see the cost of electricity generation pretty much at zero now, and that's the unsubsidized cost. So there's a huge opportunity just with that energy transition there. And when we actually have a look at things like into the future, we have China that want to put solar space stations into orbit that beam 6 gigawatts worth of electricity down to Earth. They're starting that in 2025. We are looking to join up all of the intercontinental global supergrids so that wind generated in the Gobi Desert can be exported to London, for example. We have hydrogen, which is increasingly coming down. So, for example, the cost of a kilogram of blue hydrogen is now 90 cents. Green hydrogen is kind of $3. Gray hydrogen, which comes from coal-based resources, is $1.2. So the cost of hydrogen is coming down, and the number of hydrogen projects is exploding globally.
Yeah.
Ammonia as well. We're starting to see the decarbonization of the ammonia industry, which benefits agriculture. So agriculture, for example, emits 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Fertilizer is one of those. Cows are another, and we have a solution for cows. You just make meat out of a bioreactor and you don't need the animal any longer. So, yeah, but as I say, when we start talking about the future of energy, 3D printed lithium ion batteries that are 400% more energy dense, that all of a sudden allow us to create electric aircraft, because electric aircraft need a boost.
Yeah.
If you want a zero emissions super yacht, you can pretty much have that today.
Yeah.
The energy revolution is absolutely staggering. The amount of activity and the number of breakthroughs that we're seeing in everything from nano generators that will allow an aircraft to generate electricity from the air friction as it travels through the sky, all the way through to 3D printed solid state batteries, et cetera, is just immense. And it's an immense opportunity for the super yacht industry to decarbonize. Even when we have a look at things like air conditioning, as I showed, I think at the last forum, we have zero energy air conditioning that sends all of the heat from your super yacht directly into the coldness of space, using sort of the laws of thermodynamics and everything else. You don't need the electricity for that. And again, sort of you and I have sort of talked about, it's all very well showing some of these things, but we need to get these embedded into the manufacturing and design process, basically, of the super yacht industry, in order to really start moving the dial. And when we start talking about introducing some of these technologies basically into the industry, it's a case of getting people out of their comfort zones, having a look at them, evaluating them, figuring out how they would integrate these things into the designs, and then actually taking that leap. And again, if you have an HNW that says, I really care about sustainability, and I'm willing to actually pay a little bit more initially, bearing in mind the cost of some of these technologies is up here to start with, then it falls, then that's where they can take leadership positions as well, in terms of, we are now using zero energy air conditioning in real life. Now let's start seeing if we can actually move that to more commercial applications and everything else, almost like a proof of concept lab.
I think that's the point. It's almost like, can we be the Formula One of the super yacht space, being the Formula One of marine, in the way that Formula One can drive change in automotive? I think one of the things I'm trying to inspire people to think, let's not stick to the conventions. Let's really accelerate and almost excite the hundreds of thousands of people that don't have a yacht today, because maybe they think it's an impractical, unnecessary asset.
Well, I mean, so one of the things we sort of talked about last time was, and this was sort of a couple of years ago, basically sort of pre-COVID, was we can already 3D print glass. Okay, so we can do that. We can 3D print metals and everything else. So I can 3D print a superstructure. And we're seeing sort of that today. I can 3D print a superstructure that is 70% lighter than the ones today and actually twice as strong, which reduces the overall weight and then the energy dynamics, basically, et cetera, et cetera. However, now, today, I can 3D print wood. So we have an incredibly interesting way to create sustainable wood products. I can 3D print leather. Other things that I can do is, if I really wanted to be ostentatious, I could deck my super yacht out in a gazillion diamonds. Except those diamonds are actually carbon neutral. In fact, they're actually carbon negative, because increasingly we have organizations like Sky Diamonds, et cetera, that are able to draw carbon dioxide and methane and a variety of other gases out of the air, put them under huge pressures to create, essentially these lab-grown diamonds. That De Beers originally sort of poo-pooed as, they're fake, et cetera. But actually that De Beers are now starting to pivot, because increasingly the lab-grown diamond industry is saying, yes, but these are actually diamonds. They're just made faster and in a different way. They are sustainable. We don't need to rip the earth apart any longer to actually get these diamonds. And all of a sudden, companies like De Beers are going, we're going to gently enter that market as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And for an HNW, yeah, if I can give you a 20, I mean, the largest lab-grown diamond is 45 carats. If I can give you a 45 carat diamond that actually has benefited the planet by its manufacture, as opposed to a 45 carat diamond that had to be ripped out of an African, diamond mine, et cetera, where people are paid very low wages, and we have all that sort of
ESG stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Which one would you prefer? And then this comes down to the individual. Now, typically, a lot of the younger generations are showing that they will actually take the lab-grown diamond over the one that was ripped out of the earth.
Yeah.
Which then shows that we actually kind of have this difference in generational thinking. And actually, ironically, if young people are able to actually teach some of the elderly people, their grandfathers, their dads, their moms, their grandmother, their grandmothers, that there is a better way to save the planet without actually having to compromise some of that lifestyle that they so crave.
Yes.
Then it changes the conversation. And then it changes attitudes. And when we start changing attitudes, then we actually start moving the dial on some of the societal problems. And who's losing in that situation? If your lifestyle is the same, but you are now doing good for people and planet, as well as your own family and your own family's future, who's losing there? I don't think anyone is.
I think that's almost the mind shift we have to take now.
Yeah.
And especially if we start at the top of the pyramid with the ultra high net worths and high net worths, you suddenly have a different sort of investment strategy in how to live longer and better.
Yeah. And then just sort of topping it all off, the world's largest problems are also the world's largest business opportunities. So you have the lifestyle that you want and crave.
Yeah.
You are helping people and planet, and you're actually making more money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Provided you're investing intelligently and all that stuff. That's it. And this is not investment advice.
Last question.
Put that in there.
Last question before we close off on this lovely topic and lovely conversation. Yeah. You've worked with lots of governments over the years. You have some quite interesting conversations at government level. What is the government's attitude, you think, to ultra high net worths, very high net worths, and even, if you can, our crazy world of super yachting?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. So one of the things actually that you alluded to earlier that actually I didn't cover, that I was going to cover, was increasingly we are seeing HNWs and UHNWs being more powerful than governments. Now, from a government perspective, so I work with all G20. And I typically, as you know, I typically work prime ministers, presidents, and minister sort of level. Particularly when we have a look at the West and sort of Middle East, there is generally this belief within government that government cannot solve the world's challenges alone, or even some of their regional and national challenges alone, and that they have to have a public-private partnership. So, in short, governments increasingly believe that the private sector have an increasingly vital role in helping them transform their own economies and solve some of the world's greatest challenges. Now, to put this into perspective and just to sort of give some factlets out, the first fully autonomous vehicles were actually part of a US military competition, and the vehicles were designed by Google. At no point did the US government think we need to revolutionize the transportation industry. What about cars that drive themselves? That came from private industry, and now we have the entire transportation industry flipping. When we have a look at renewables and energy, you could actually argue that Elon Musk basically is moved the dial on that one because he is a ultra high net worth individual with a purpose, kind of, do good, as well as other things. When we actually have a look at space, increasingly organizations like Blue Origin, SpaceX, and others, Rocket Lab, Relativity, are actually democratizing access to space in ways that NASA simply couldn't because it was federally funded. Now, on the one hand, and this you might sort of wonder, well, what does this have to do with anything? Yeah, on the one hand, basically, we've sort of made some interesting discoveries in space from a healthcare and materials perspective and so on and so forth. But by reducing the cost of accessing space by 99%, I can launch more stuff into space cheaper than ever before.
Yes.
Some of the things that I can launch into space are low Earth orbit satellite constellations, which I can now use, courtesy of Starlink, OneWeb, and all these other sort of projects, to connect the other 4 billion people on the planet to the internet who don't have a good internet connection. Now we start giving those people access to any kind of digital service, from education, healthcare, finance, banking. You know, we have financial inclusion as a benefit and all these sorts of other things. NASA couldn't have done that, you know, at all. And even sort of Tim Cook basically went on the record about 2 years ago saying government can no longer do some of these things alone. So HNWs and UHNWs actually have a pivotal role now in working alongside government and actually to some respect guiding government on how to fix some of these issues. But the benefit that, for example, Google has over the American government is Google can say, well, you know, we think that renewable energy is the future of energy. The US government, as we saw under a previous president, can say, bah humbug, load of rubbish. The US government's jurisdiction realistically ends at its own borders, outside of conversations about hard and soft power plays. Mm-hmm. Google's doesn't. If Google wants to go and spin up a 6 gigawatt solar farm, basically in Nigeria, they can do it. You know, they've got to go through all the planning applications and everything else, but they can do it. You know, the US government couldn't really do that. You know, it wouldn't be easy for them. It wouldn't be easy for them to justify the investment to the US taxpayers. So this is where increasingly I actually argue ultra high net worth individuals are more powerful than government when it comes to being able to see the future, embrace the future, and then transition to that future state. And there are so many examples. I highlighted 3/4: communication, space, energy, and transportation. But, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, basically with the Chen Zuckerberg Institute, Bezos, basically with the Altos Institute, you know, increasingly they're funding a huge amount of medical and life extension research that will inevitably start finding its way into everyday healthcare. You know, governments basically simply wouldn't have taken that risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a huge amount of opportunity for UHNWs basically to do things that they could never ever have imagined, science fiction like things basically that they could never have imagined, but actually turn it into a business, profit from it, but actually, more importantly, help create a more equitable and prosperous future world for people and planet.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the interesting subjects whereby the ultra high net worth sometimes get a very bad rap from the media or from the general, let's say, uneducated perspective. But actually, they are part of our future, and we need to almost support them in some bizarre ways to let them get on with what they're doing.
Well, and this is it. You know, I mean, if you have a look at Bill Gates, with the Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation, and so on and so forth, or Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, sorry. You know, they're using their billions basically to try to wipe out malaria, create new types of sanitation toilets and all this sort of stuff. And this is sort of the society that we actually find ourselves in. People will always take umbrage with you because you are rich, we are poor. You have things, we do not. You know, you live in the UK, you know, I live in Africa, whatever it happens to be. There are so many reasons now for people to be divisive. You know, this is sort of one of the reasons why we seem to live in this increasingly polarized world. But again, this is very much a narrative. You know, people are always going to take issue with other people. You know, you're tall, I'm short. You know, you're big, basically I'm thin. You've got muscles, I haven't got muscles, you know, all that kind of stuff. Yes. You're well educated, I'm not well educated. You went to private school, I didn't go to private school, whatever it happens to be. There's so many different dividing lines basically between society. And this sort of pulls us away from trying to unify society for the greater good of its own self. But when it comes to ultra high net worth individuals, part of the stigma that people have with UHNWs and HNWs is your level of consumption is far, far greater than the average person's. Bearing in mind that each year humanity uses over 100 billion tons worth of resources, and only 9% of that is actually recycled. So on the one hand, again, it comes to the culture and the character of the individual. There is a narrative to be had of, yes, we consume more, but frankly, everyone generally wants to be richer so that they can consume more, live a better lifestyle and everything else. UHNWs have just got there.
Yeah.
But with a lot of people, they sort of say, well, okay, we can see you taking things out of society. What are you actually putting back?
Yeah.
And with a lot of that comes down to just poor UHNW communication.
Yes.
Because some of them are doing some phenomenal things, like Bill Gates, for example. And increasingly, very few people are able to have a go at Bill Gates and go, look, you're consuming more than the average person, but frankly, what are you giving back? And he goes, well, I'm giving back this. And they go, and they change the conversation to, well, actually, you're trying to vaccinate us with a microchip and you're horrible. And it's like, that's just stupid. Go and bug someone else. And why don't you actually, rather than trying to focus on the problems, why aren't you part of the solution? Yeah. So there is that leadership role that UHNWs can actually play. But a lot of it is you've got to do something. So have a purpose. You've got to do something. And then when you do something, you have to broadcast it. Because if I don't know that you've done something good, I just assume that you are take.
Yeah.
And that is generally not the case.
Yeah. I think the positive sort of purpose, people, planet topic is quite hot at the moment, and it really makes a big difference if I say the visibility of these actions are much more high profile. Otherwise, it becomes a real sort of negative sort of perception. And we've had that problem in yachting for years. I think it's another topic we have to explore in another conversation.
Yeah. And I suppose, in terms of sort of how HNWs and UHNWs basically can actually tell their stories. As I say, I work with a lot of investors as well as a lot of typically fortune organizations, those kinds of guys. Align yourselves with the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. And then when you actually are doing things to benefit and improve the state of those goals, communicate your message along the lines of those goals. Be clear with your messaging and almost use ESG-like messaging. Because if you just sort of say, as an individual or an organization, we cut 10 million tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, people sort of go, okay, it's a good stat. But so what? Tell stories, create content, shove it onto YouTube. Again, we sort of talk about a lot of UHNWs basically sort of being the older generations. Create content, show the positive impact that you are having on the planet. Be inspirational and motivational to future generations. Show them how they can actually make a difference in their own lives as well. And lead by example. If you don't lead by example, no one's going to follow you.
Yeah. I think Elon Musk is a great example of that.
Yeah. And, when you have a look at his popularity really across generations, as well as, countries and different sort of, levels. He's popular. He's pretty much popular with everybody. And interestingly enough, some of the things that he actually does is, he's running the $100 million Carbon X Prize, which is an interesting one. And actually, we've got students going through that as well. So if you want to support, some of the things that he actually does is he will sit down with his critics. And, I've done this with Richard Branson as well. You sit down with critics and the critics go, you're just bad for everything. And he goes, well, X, Y, and Z. So giving you an example, Elon Musk, you talk about building a renewable energy sort of industry. But at the same time, you're building rockets that are highly polluting. How do you balance that conversation? Okay, well, here's how we balance the conversation. So everyone thinks rockets are polluting. The SN-15 and SN-16 Falcon Heavy prototypes actually are powered by methane. You can draw methane and carbon dioxide and other sort of gases out of the air to create methane fuel. So the methane fuel that is used for the Falcon Heavy which costs about $2 million per launch, by the way, is actually carbon neutral. Mm. So now, as Elon Musk, you as a critic have gone, your rockets are really polluting everything. And he goes, actually, they're carbon neutral. Mm. Now, where's my argument as a critic? What do I pick him up on now?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So again, a lot of this comes down to, have a conversation with critics, be bold. If there is something that a critic can actually hook onto for a valid reason, then don't pretend it doesn't exist. Say, well, okay, look, we realize that that's a problem. However, we have a solution and we're working on it. We ask you to bear with us. Don't bury your head in the sand and say, yes, by sending rockets basically up to Mars and all this kind of stuff, we're doing good for society and humanity or whatever it happens to be. If you just sort of want to turn humanity into an interplanetary species, be bold, face your critics, have a conversation.
Yeah.
But people who are doing meaningful things and who actually have the courage to try to make the world a better place, they also have to have the courage, basically, to, on the one hand, face these critics.
Yeah.
But they also have to have confidence that what they are doing is the right thing, and they have to be able to talk about it. They have to show and lead by example, and they have to be able to show people the actions and steps that they have taken to change whatever that problem is, or the image of whatever that problem is.
Exactly. Fascinating, Matthew. Fascinating as always. I look forward to being on stage with you again soon, and thanks a million for your time.
Likewise. Well, thank you, Martin. All the best, everybody. Great talking with you.
I'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks.